That's perfect.
Do you have integrated video? No.
I have integrated video, but let me see if I can. Like this?
Yeah, this is perfect.
I don't know if that's. I think that might actually do the trick.
Okay, I should learn how to do it.
Okay, it's actually, it seems it's a new feature from the on WeChat meeting.
Okay. Nice. But you don't have any other video, right? No.
You mean, sorry, now I have to figure out how to stop sharing actually.
On the top of the screen.
Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, good. Sorry, you mean what were you saying?
You don't have any other video to share, right? Sometimes the sound doesn't work, but yeah.
You mean the video? So my audio in the in Tencent meeting.
We have less time, but it's okay.
I think it's okay in Tencent meeting because Tencent meeting is more convenient in China. Yeah, but sometimes in Zoom it does happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we should start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
First, let me just share the little video. 菜花，你可以开始直播了。
PTA 植物联盟是一个致力于环境可持续发展转型的学习社区。我们的成员在香港、台湾、纽约、波士顿、北京、广州、上海、成都、济南等各地同时开展工作，通过心、脑、手的学习和成长，达到社会、环境、商业三重价值的统一实现，多维度助力环境可持续发展的转型。如果您想在生活与工作中得到可持续发展的成长和转型，请您参加我们的绿色成长营，同我们一起从自然的视角反观自身，在万物共荣的自然界中得到滋养与启发，在思考自然与我们的关系中找到新的生命支点，让生活、事业、家庭与自然一同繁荣。如果您在商业界奋斗，想要把握住经济可持续转型的商业趋势，请您参加 pta-plant 可持续商业培训项目。在全球可持续商业最顶尖的学者专家和行业领袖的引导下，与全球的同行者们一道探索新时代可持续商业的无限可能。如果您是在校大学生，请您参加我们的绿萝小队，里面有来自全球各地的伙伴与您一起学习，一同实践，为未来的环境可持续事业奠定坚实的基础。如果您想聆听环境可持续发展的一线实践，请您加入我们周三晚的线上分享中，共同聆听环境可持续行业最前沿的资讯和最真实的故事。如果您想带着孩子一起参与可持续发展的实践，请加入面向亲子家庭的自然环境教育项目“自然魔法棒”。如果您关注气候变化，请关注国内第一家以气候变化为主题的短视频品牌“气候加速度”。在环境可持续发展领域，很多概念正在进化中，期待您加入到我们中来，一起去学习、关注和讨论，将环境可持续发展融入到我们的生活和工作中，让世界回归自然。
Hello，大家好，今天是周三晚，分享时间。我很高兴，周三晚邀请我来主持今天晚上的会议。今天的演讲嘉宾呢，大家可能在群里面已经看到了，是我们西湖大学的博士生导师，以及博士生导师，然后他呢在中国开创了新的研究领域，可以说开辟了一个新的赛道。今天呢，我可能接下来用英语简短的向大家稍微导入一下这个Tom 博士，然后呢由他来为大家做一个演讲，然后之后呢来回答大家提出的问题。当然，如果问题呢，你们可以用中文提出，我可以帮忙用英文来翻译给他听。他现在呢是住在杭州西湖，大家也可以直接到杭州去找他，这样呢可以更面对面的沟通，我觉得也非常的棒。Okay, everybody, tonight we have Mr. Professor Wanger. We can call him Tom. To be our guest, to share the very, very advanced technology in this field. I think it's so advanced that many of us never heard about it before. It is, in my view, it's a new racing field in the international agriculture business. So let's listen to him. And if you have any question, please just let us know. We will have maybe about 20 minutes to discuss more details. Thank you, Tom, and you could start.
Thank you very much, Hai Xiang, for the kind introduction. Let me just share my screen here.
Yeah, I already invited all the audience or the people here to visit you in Hangzhou.
Oh, okay, that's good. So we will have a lot of people coming.
Yes, will be nice.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, and you probably see me also here in the top, in the bottom corner, right?
Yes.
So I just discovered this nice new feature of Tencent Meeting. So Hai Xiang, thanks a lot for this kind introduction, and let's just straight jump into the conversation that we're going to have. So I will be talking primarily about the work that we're doing at my lab, the Sustainable Agricultural Systems and Engineering Lab at Westlake University in Hangzhou, where we focus on the global food system transformation. So moving agriculture from how we know it with inputs, fertilizers, pesticides to produce high yields, to something that will actually feed not only us, but also future generations. And we will focus on agricultural diversification and some technologies that we have been developing in my group. So let's jump in and see how this works here. Good. So we briefly talked about conventional agriculture that arose from the Green Revolution. So basically, pioneers like the godfather of hybrid rice, Zhuang Longping, as many of you will know, he paved the way for an way of agriculture that is based on new genetic varieties, pesticides to control disease and pests that we see in agriculture. And due to that, an efficient and new irrigation techniques. So through that, we could increase crop yields, and we actually, in the end, could feed millions, billions of people and prevent them from starvation. But now, some of these issues that conventional agriculture has right now are very critical to take a look at right now. So we know that by 2050, we will be 10 billion people on planet Earth. And what that means is that we not only have to provide more food, but it also means we have to provide more high quality food. So food that provides more calories, that provides more high quality protein. And the challenge here is that we have to do that on less than 32% of the land that is already suitable for agriculture. So we shouldn't really expand more, because if we do that, it will affect biodiversity and species that are important for so-called ecosystem services that biologically regulate pest species so that we can use less pesticides. And also that will help us to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that result from agriculture, which are currently approximately 1/4, but if we incorporate the entire supply chain, up to 1/3 of all global greenhouse gas emissions. So in a nutshell, what I'm showing you here on this slide are all the issues condensed that we have with current agricultural systems. So now a solution that has been pointed out and that is discussed on various global international levels is a global food systems transformation. You can see here, now I can try pointing upwards. At the very top of that pyramid, you see nutritious food is a key, right? Healthy diets shifting from a lot of red meat consumption towards something that is more vegetable-based. We have all heard about this. Below that, we see nature-based solutions. So farming systems that are designed to actually understand the ecological processes and to reduce these inputs that we mentioned several times, so fertilizers and pesticides. And then underneath that here, we have the wider choices of people that they can take. They can choose different kind of protein sources, plant-based proteins, insect-based proteins. And at the very bottom of that pyramid, we have basically opportunities for all, which means digital revolution, empowering rural livelihoods, and looking more into gender and demographies for food production systems. Of course, as a research lab, we cannot focus on all of these topics. So I want to just, during this conversation, talk about the points that we really focus on. The first is a concept and something that will help us to achieve the sustainable food systems transformation, and that is agricultural diversification. The second is basically building collaborative global scale platforms to co-create data, to use what we already have and to make sense of larger scale data sets. And then the third point I want to point out here is the technology part that we're developing in my group to monitor what's happening in the environment and how we can facilitate knowledge exchange between researchers and the work that we're doing and farmers and policymakers. So in a nutshell, this is what we're going to talk about. Agricultural diversification across scales. I'll tell you what it is and what we know and what we don't know. I'll talk about two large-scale platforms that I co-founded in 2020 and 2021, the Global Agroforestry Network and the China Rice Network. We'll then shift towards technology, talking about how we can quantify diversification in the environment, look more into technology for knowledge transfer, and then I will all try and wrap that up in a short outlook for you. Agricultural diversification. So I have mentioned that a couple of times, but what are we talking about here? So for those of you who live in the US, but also it's applicable anywhere else, you will know corn production, soil production, and you can also do that in a kind of temporal rotation system. So you plant your corn, and generally looks like what we see here on the left-hand side. So you have your corn plants with short roots, and at the bottom you see some numbers. So how much of your soil is actually lost, how much of the nitrogen and the phosphorus and all the nutrients in the soil are lost. Now, if we actually just replace a tiny little bit of that corn and we plant so-called prairie strips, these little plants that you see here on the picture on the right, you see that these plants have long roots. And what that does is it actually prevents the soil from running off through rain, and also it prevents nutrients from getting lost. And so it does something else. It actually provides flowers, and these flowers attract bees, and these bees are responsible for pollination of other crops. So if you think of strawberries, for example, if strawberries don't have bees, we cannot enjoy these delicious red fruits, right? So if you have these plants, you have more bees for pollination, you also have more birds. This is actually what diversification means, is basically adding this, what we call functional diversity to a system to benefit from other ecosystem services like pollination. When we talk about diversification, in this context here, we're talking about the production stage of agricultural supply chains. However, this whole process is also applicable for its entirety of the supply chain. So all the way from the production stage to the end consumer. So does this diversification, adding functional diversity in the production stage, actually work? So this is the result of a study that we did in 2020, where we actually combined all the knowledge that we have across diversification systems. So all crops, rice, cocoa, coffee, you name it, any kind of crop anywhere in the world. We condensed all the literature that is available, all the knowledge in the scientific community. And we found basically that everything that is green has a positive effect, everything that is red has a negative effect, and everything that is gray has a neutral effect. So diversification, organic farming, for instance, organic amendments to the soil, crop diversification, overall have up to 70% positive effects on biodiversity and ecosystem services that are provided by biodiversity, so pollination and pest control, that we ultimately need to reduce our inputs. But it's also interesting to note that in many cases, crop yields are maintained or positively affected. So we know that, for instance, for rice production. So diversification is not just good for the environment per se, but it also can help to amplify yields. What we also did through this work is identify trade-offs. So when we diversify agricultural systems, we're of course interested in crop yields, but we also want to understand how that is affecting biodiversity and other ecosystem services, but we actually don't know enough on that kind of aspects. So we really have to do some more research. And we also have knowledge gaps in terms of crop-specific effects. So for instance, for rice production, this is an area where we really need to learn a bit more. And this is something I come back to at a later stage of this talk. So we also have diversification across different scales. So I just talked about the global scale, but when you look at farms, they are embedded in landscapes. So landscapes can be simplified as here on this picture, or they can be very diverse and complex. And there are studies that show that if you have these complex systems, complex landscapes like this, they're in a special spatial arrangement, you can actually also maintain biodiversity and ecosystem services, but also it's beneficial for crop yields. And then I want to for the first time, mention cocoa for chocolate production here, because this is a system that I've been working on for over a decade now. So when we look at the farm scale, we often see cocoa produced in these monocultures here on the left-hand side. So that means you only have cocoa trees, nothing else. But when you look at the picture on the right-hand side, this is a so-called cocoa agroforestry system, where you have cocoa trees interspersed with larger shade trees. And research has shown that this diversification, these cocoa agroforestry systems, provide various benefits. For example, while not affecting economic performance, you see that, for instance, carbon sequestration of the entire system is vastly improved. And that, of course, is important for climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. Climate change mitigation and greenhouse gas emission reductions. So overall, to sum up this section, we can say that diversification can really help us to enhance environmental benefits, including carbon sequestration and crop yields. But we do have some knowledge gaps in terms of where diversification is applied and to which crops diversification is applied. So let's jump to the collaborative platforms part of the talk, where I want to introduce to you the Global Agroforestry Network, which is what you see here on the website on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, you see the website of the China Rice Network. So the Global Agroforestry Network is targeting cocoa, coffee, and rubber production. So cocoa, as I introduced, is for chocolate. Coffee, we all know. And rubber is used for tires of cars, but also for rubber gloves, for instance, or other medical devices. So what these crops all have in common, that they can be produced in so-called agroforestry systems. And these agroforestry systems are diverse agricultural systems. But the work on these systems is, as we found out, is fairly fairly scattered at the moment. So with this network, we're trying to bring in researchers across the globe from different universities. You see a couple of them mentioned here at the bottom. to really synthesize and bring together the data sets and the research sites that we have to do global scale research. And that allows us to do some very interesting and nice projects. On the right-hand side in the China Rice Network, we look at rice production in China and what happens if you diversify rice systems. So we also pursue the same approach. It's just a bit more China focused, but I will also introduce some of these projects to you. So let's jump in and look at the global agroforestry network projects first. So when you, I mentioned initially that we're quite interested in, not just publishing scientific research publications, but also to create impact from the work that we're doing. So this first project is targeting rubber production. So actually, we were thinking about rubber, how it is produced. It's usually produced in simple agroforestry systems. And if you want to facilitate this transformation to diversified systems, you really have to know what you're talking about. So what is a rubber agroforestry system and what are the benefits? So one of the first projects that we did is actually we aggregated a lot of data and we defined for the first time what rubber agroforestry is and provided that typology for large-scale industry platforms so that they can actually start working on agroforestry systems. This is, maybe I go over this a bit quicker. This is actually the same process. We're doing this right now, working on defining agroforestry for cocoa and coffee systems, because we've seen that in particular for cocoa and coffee, there's a lot of international attention during the COP15, during the COP26, but also, 27, but also we have new policies in Europe that are targeting these kind of crops that are at a larger scale responsible for transformation of natural ecosystems in the tropics. So here, this is another example where we try to influence policy or advise policy on a global scale. We have also worked together with the World Research, or we're working together with the World Resource Institute and the Crowther Lab at ETH Zurich to basically use the research sites that we have in the global agroforestry system. So we have a global agroforestry network. So we have over 50,000 sites in continents across the world. So Brazil, covering Latin America, Central Africa and West Africa, but also Asia. And we're using transfer learning to predict basically in what degraded areas we could plant cocoa and coffee agroforestry system as a good opportunity for carbon sequestration and as a restoration tool, basically. When we come to the China Rice Network, I also want to show you some of the good work that people from my lab have been leading. So this is, we talked in the global overview about knowledge gaps in different cropping systems, and particularly rice. But now China is globally one of the largest rice producer. And we do know that diversification research existed, but we don't have this global aggregation of what we actually know about when you diversify rice systems. What happens to the economy? What happens to biodiversity? What happens to crop yields? So here we synthesized 50 years of research in Chinese and in English. It's the first large-scale study that is now under review, where we show basically that here for rice, diversification has huge potential, particularly for economy, biodiversity, and yield. But we also can pinpoint the differences between different producer countries, as you can see here on this graph. It's just like to exemplify the detail and the variability that we see in this work. So here we're closing an important research gap with colleagues from all over the world and focused on China. And then I want to talk also a little bit more about our work on policy. So the paper that you see here, or the figure that you see here on the left-hand side, basically summarizes our recent work where we talk about diversification and integrating this in China's major policies in the National 5-Year Plan, in the number one central documents, but also in provincial level policies, and how the research that we've done and what we've learned from this research can help to implement diversification and make agriculture in China more sustainable and use that as a positive case study and a showcase basically in the world. We've done similar work in Europe, and also my group is involved in the agroecology discussion of the FAO and other international bodies. So to sum that up, basically our networks, the Global Agroforestry Network and the China Rice Network, have launched 6 or so projects with more than 20 institutions in more than 10 countries. So I think we have, despite we've been active for only 2.5, 3 years roundabout, we've actually done quite a bit. And this is also a call for collaboration. If we have some researchers in the audience here, some colleagues that are interested in proposing some new projects or interesting to collaborate in terms of data sharing, I'm always very happy to have that conversation and see what we can do together. Now let's move to the technology part of the talk. Basically, when you look at technology in sustainable agriculture, I just want to show you this table here. You see that different technologies, sensor tech, big data, and precision agriculture, have all resulted in measurable and actually tremendous benefits in reducing food waste, increasing farmers' income, increasing production, and also reducing environmental impacts. But then one part that really needs some more work to actually better understand and optimize these diversification processes is ecosystem monitoring, to put small cameras, sound devices, sensor devices in the field, in agricultural fields, but also natural environments, to monitor and measure what is going on and how we can actually manage these systems to optimize for the environment, for people, and for the economy in the end. So this is basically what we've been doing in parts in my team. So you see, I start here from the right hand side of the of the slide. So you see parts or you see our team here that is based in Hangzhou and also in Brazil, where we also have a field site. And we've developed these small cameras. They are actually literally that big. They're embedded cameras. That means we basically can run machine learning models on these cameras, and they can trigger actions once they detect anything that you've trained the models for. So we can train these models, for instance, for small insects that are pollinating cocoa for chocolate production, or we can also train them to monitor bats in rice fields that feed on rice pests. So a case study for biological pest control. These cameras are low power, and we can integrate multiple different sensor types to measure not just measure visual cues, but also audible cues and other parameters in the environment. So we've done a couple of interesting case studies that have tested the cameras, what they can actually do. So we have deployed the cameras very close to a target, very close to a cocoa flower. That's the first case. I like pointing there. That's the first case up there. And the cocoa flowers are actually, 1 centimeter in diameter, and the insects are sometimes less than 1 millimeter. We have different techniques. We have basically frame differencing. We have classification techniques. We use these cameras during day and night. So there's different applications. And I just want to come back to our networks and give you some example projects for what we have been using them. So the first case study is cocoa, the second is rice, and the third is just a case study that I like to show because I think it's interesting. So we just a little bit of background on cocoa. So cocoa is a tree, and basically it has these small flowers, and if there are no insects, no pollinators, the cocoa tree cannot produce little fruits, and it cannot produce buds, and it cannot produce beans. And what that means is, if there's no pollinators, there's no chocolate in the end. So what we have shown is in previous work that if you hand pollinate, you can actually, so that means you take 2 flowers and put them together. As you see in these pictures here at the top, you can increase yields by 160%. if you think about this, this is of course a very big deal, but it's expensive if you pay people to do hand pollination. So we want to use these cameras to basically track little visitors of cocoa flowers during day and night. It's the first time that this is actually possible. And now we're using that we're using that to track the pollinators, and then in the end give recommendations to farmers, but also to the cocoa industry of how to better manage these plantations, so that they don't have to invest the money to hand pollinate a cocoa, but actually, you can just manage your plantations and increase the amount of insects. The second case study for the rice network is focused on bats, controlling, you might have heard of white-backed landhoppers, very important pests that actually eat the rice grains. So basically, if you have bats in a previous study, we have shown if you have bats in your rice fields, they will eat as many pests to protect 26,000 rice meals per year. And that translates into a monetary value of $1.2 million per year. So having bats in your rice fields, in this case study in Thailand, is actually really worth it. So what we want to do here, we want to use our cameras to track, as a little bit of a challenge, to track bats at night, and also insects, and then see how many insects the bats can feed, and what that means for food production and sustainable production in rice, and for sustainable rice production in China. And the third and last example here I want to give briefly is monitoring bee activity of emerging pollutants. So we know all that plastics are emerging pollutants. We see them in the ocean, but we also see them increasingly in agricultural soils. So we have done an experiment to test how plastics in the soil affect a very common oilseed crop like rapeseed. You see these yellow plants everywhere in China and Europe at the moment. And we put some osmia bees in these cages to better understand how plastic pollution is actually affecting pollinators. What we're doing with our cameras here is basically detecting the bees and to also track the flight path of the bees to see if we have any changes that can be traced back to plastic. So to sum up that part about the cameras, really, our AI-based cameras can be trained on pretty much anything in terms of animals or plants. So we can also use them as phenocams. They're really designed to use their waterproof, low power, and we can integrate multiple sensors and run them for 24/7 deployments. So overall, I think this is a nice tool to really quantitatively assess how we can optimize diversification, not only in research, but also in practice. So then shifting to knowledge transfer. So we are very interested in putting what we know from research, all about our diversification research, putting that into the hands of people that are actually doing the farming, the farmers themselves. So how do we do this? We basically have hosted already 3 United Nations Food System Summit dialogues. So these are kind of workshops where we try and understand how climate change is affecting farmers and their crop production. But not only that, we're also trying to understand how we can basically provide the information to them that they need to mitigate these climate impacts. So how can diversification, for instance, help them to reduce kind of drought stress on cocoa? And how do they actually want to receive this information? You can think that in a place like Madagascar, where internet is very shaky and unavailable, the requirements of how they get this information might be very different to a country like China or the US. So what we've done here, we've also done these workshops in China, and we're currently expanding to Indonesia, in Ethiopia, and we're trying to basically then get to something that you see here at the very top. That's kind of preliminary results of the climate issues that people face, the production issues, but also socioeconomic issues. So then I can actually end here and give a brief outlook of what we talked about. Basically, I think it's broadly acknowledged now, and I hope I could convince you that diversification can really provide some important benefits for the environment in terms of biodiversity conservation. It can help us to mitigate climate impacts, which also has now been acknowledged in the recent IPCC synthesis report. And we can also relate diversification benefits to yield stability and crop yields in general. I think the ecosystem monitoring device that I introduced to you has the potential to further optimize what we have seen and achieved through diversified agricultural systems, because we can quantify and better understand how we have to manage these systems. And then when we look at knowledge transfer, I feel that this is really the key to mainstream diversification and give the tools that we have and understand from our research into the hands of not just farmers, but also policy and decision makers to advance the global food systems transformation. But before I close with this talk and we move to the discussions and the questions, I think what is very important to stress here is that agriculture, as simple as it may seem for some, is a very complex endeavor. We have many different players. We have all sort of different research fields. When I just talk about my own domain, we have the policymakers that need to understand things. We really need to work very closely with the industry, because they're the driving force behind all that big change, and many other stakeholders. So I cannot stress enough how important collaboration and coming together and talking about these issues is to really push impact and change. So with this, I would like to very much thank you for joining this seminar. I want to thank my team, the Sustainable Agricultural Systems and Engineering Lab that you see here in this picture. They're doing a fantastic job, and I think without this team, without this team, I couldn't actually show you anything here. And then I want to stress that at Westlake, we're a new private university. We have actually many faculty opportunities. We have very nice resources. So if you're a researcher interested in a career in China, please also feel free to get in touch. If you're interested for postdocs, if you're interested in PhD opportunities, also feel free to connect with me. You have, now I have to go to this way. You can have all the details. Interesting to find out how this works. You have all my details here to get in touch. So thanks again for the opportunity, and I'm happy to have a discussion now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tom, for such a high-level presentation. I'm so much impressed. May I, maybe I should apply for the doctor PhD in your department.
You're very welcome, but I think you're pretty much overqualified.
No, I'm too old. That's the point. So I think you. Never. That's never too old for learning. So we learn here together from you, and your research is, let's say, has such profound meaning for the Chinese agriculture future, but also for the entire planet, I see. And since, we have growing population and we have rapid loss of the biodiversity, this is such an important research field. Thank you very much for sharing all the information. So first of all, I know there are some spontaneous questions here in the chat room, but I would give the priority to the questions which were raised beforehand. So the first question is, how can sustainable agriculture technology adapt to the weak technological basis of developing countries? Maybe relate to like Africa and Latin America, to these countries which which don't have this cameras and high-tech big data technology and so on. Yeah, I think very good question.
Yeah, I think I agree. That's a very interesting question. So And I think it has different levels as well. So the first part, which is already discussed, well, it's already brought up in the question itself. So when we look at, let's take Madagascar, for example, with a per capita GDP of 2,000 USD, and compare this with like a per capita GDP with China of, I think, 20,000 USD at the moment, or 2021, I think was the data that I checked. Of course, there is different investment power of farmers and in general into these kind of high technologies like AI, as a buzzword, in fancy farmings and fancy greenhouses, in you name it. So it's different opportunities to invest there. But I think what is probably more important is to think more of what is technology, right? I mean, so we can think of technology as big data, sensor-driven devices and harvesting robots, all these kind of things, which are really exciting, and I love to talk about these kind of things. But actually, when you think of countries like Madagascar, when you think of higher technology farms, we might already talk about, kind of a semi-automated irrigation system for rice, or we might talk about access to technologies such as inoculation technologies, where you can actually spike the soils with specifically designed microorganisms, or you actually think about on a simple sense, can we actually talk about agroforestry, where we integrate trees in a cocoa system? That's a management strategy. You can do that with kind of engineered trees. That is, you can kind of plant different varieties of cocoa trees together. That's a kind of technology. So different technologies will be available in different countries, regardless of their GDP. So I think an important part of this discussion is also like, how do we make technology available to these countries, and how do we create funding mechanisms that go beyond these simple technologies, and how can we actually help farmers to achieve a higher level of technologization? And I think here the recent initiatives during the COP27, where funding pledges are made, there's lots of new funding mechanisms, impact investments. There's lots of new strategies that will actually allow not just these lower tech approaches, but also move more towards higher tech approaches, and that's also, of course, an interesting business opportunity.
Yes, maybe I could add 2 points to your answer. First, I believe it depends on the political willingness, how strong it is. If the politicians support this kind of work, and they will get more priority in the national policy. And the second one, I think it's also why you are now doing this research in China. I think China has really the ability, Chinese government also has the ability to roll up this kind of, technologies, right?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there is this always, the government also always plays an important role in providing incentive structures with policies and so on. And I think in China, we see now that in particular the farming population is getting older and older. And that creates an important need for a rising country, emerging country like China that aspires to be self-sufficient in food production, to really think carefully of how does a country like China want to achieve that. And I think agricultural technologies paired with funding abilities in China, that's a powerful mix that can probably make that happen. But I want to stress, having said that, that just combining technology and money and putting it in the fields is really not enough. I think that's kind of a shortcut that ignores what we know about farm sizes, and that ignores what we know about diversification. And these two things really have to be considered together with technology and aging farmers.
And also maybe in combination with like a tradition, like China, we have permaculture. We call it a permaculture. So, and maybe in Egypt, like in Brazil, there are also old traditional agriculture wisdoms should be also integrated in the whole system, I think. Okay, the second question, sorry, I used too much time. The second question is, what do you think are the unsustainable aspects of Chinese agriculture at present, and where are the breakthrough points for sustainability in the future?
That's a very interesting question.
Very big question.
It's a very big question. So
Yeah.
So you know, what we did, I mentioned a publication from last year where we actually tried to integrate what we know about diversification and basically translate that into recommendations for China's national 5-year plan and the first central documents that have been published over the past, I think 17 or 18 years, and then also these like provincial level policies. And what I can say from having read through some of, not all of these policies, is that I think China has done a tremendous job in, you know, giving recommendations of how agriculture needs to be over the years, you know, more sustainable, and talking about sustainability and giving recommendations, including in particular like female women perspectives, and that's what you also were saying, you know, before, this kind of social angle. So here there's a lot of very positive developments. It's very nice to see. One of the core aspects that we see in core strategies in sustainable agriculture in China is this farmland consolidation. So here, farming systems small farming systems are combined to larger patches because in theory, it's easier to use bigger machines, right? In theory, you use less inputs. But what needs to be considered when talking about farmland consolidation is, again, what I mentioned. How does diversification and our knowledge about farm sizes come into play here? Because we actually know that if you have small farms and diverse farms and not big farms and simple farms, that's what's going to last in the future. And I think here, when we talk about sustainable agriculture, when we talk about the climate impacts that agriculture has, is really incredibly important to have that long-term view to make these kind of decisions. So I think for me, something that really needs to be incorporated in that important and actually really nice discussion is diversification and farm size.
Yes, I do fully agree with that. So I think for that reason, you need to enlarge your team.
I'm very happy to receive funding and or donations for the lab, and then I happily do that.
Yeah, you have the big potential. We will all love to help you. The third question: future agriculture development requires both technological support and policy improvements. What key roles do you see for policy and market environments in promoting agriculture diversification and sustainability? So, what key roles? Yeah, which role does the policy and the market environment, to like from the consumer side or the trading companies, for example, trading companies for this coconut and chocolate and the rice, which role could they play to help you to do this knowledge transfer?
So when you look at environmental awareness indicators, in particular, I have particularly one study in mind about climate change. So when you look at that in China, people are aware of climate change.
Yes,
but they are not aware of the implications of climate change.
Yes,
and there are other studies that suggest that you can use that kind of indicator as a surrogate for environmental awareness. So basically what that means is that the environmental awareness in China in particular is actually not that high. So the awareness of people, what does it mean sustainable food? What does it like the awareness of food safety? That's becoming more and more important, more and more of an issue. People understand that and realize that. People slowly start to look more into certified products, sustainability standards. I think a couple of things need to happen. I think because in China the government plays such a big role, I would wish for picking up that this discussion, and also I would love to be more involved in the discussion about diversification and that angle in sustainable farming in China. And I think if the government sees the benefits, I think then a lot of things will probably advance there even more. I think that from a company perspective, from an entrepreneurial perspective, if we understand how sustainability standards work, how certification bodies of sustainability standards work, I think there's a lot of business opportunities here. I think we need to really make the whole process of certification more transparent. There are business opportunities here, but there's also, of course, there is a need for consumers to make these kind of choices, and that again then comes back to this environmental awareness that I started out with. I mean, how do we get people to be more environmentally aware? And I think technology companies like Tencent, Alibaba, these guys. Through their e-commerce, they have a lot of important roles to play there. I have some ideas, so I'm very happy to also talk with people if they're interested in knowledge transfer, environmental awareness. So I think there's environmental awareness opportunity needs, business opportunities, and I think the government can hugely shape this discussion, of course.
Yes, in China, the government will play in the future even more important role, and there I also see a huge distance, a gap, let's say distance between your research and the end consumer. So if the certification will be the right tool to improve this, I'm not sure, but anyway, it's a very interesting question. So the fourth question, in the process of achieving the transformation of the global food system, what important roles and the participation do you see for farmers and agriculture practitioners? Very like, some people now in China also popular, people rent a small land, do some, a little bit organic farming, this kind of things. Yeah, for example. Yeah.
I think that when you look at these, we can start at the very top. When you look at the UN Food System Summit that happened in 2021, or when you look at the COP15, the Biodiversity Summit that actually was concluded in, I think it's the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Summit now, happened late last year, and then the COP27, the Climate Summit. It's always about integration of knowledge, and it's primarily putting farmers at the forefront at these big summits. When you then start discussing in the research community, you always see that there is more and more a trend of kind of taking a bottom-up approach, where farmer discussions are more and more taken into account of how we design. Also in our lab, that's no difference, how we design our projects to have these farmers' perspective in China, but also globally. And I think overall, this shift towards an agroecological perspective, where we talk about the economy, of course, because that's why we do agriculture, the environment, but also this perspective, this very strong social perspective of farmers and livelihoods of people. This is hugely important, because people do farming out of habit. They do this for livelihood support, and the farmers have their own needs. So if we want to make farming sustainable, if we want to be self-sufficient in farming in China, of course we need to understand what drives what's the motivation of the farmers, and what are their issues, and how we can solve and address these issues, so that we people all migrate into the city, are no longer interested in farming. So how do we provide incentive structures that farming is actually continued? Do we, will that only happen if we have these huge farming systems that are all high tech? You press a button and then your strawberries are harvested. Is that what is actually required, or will it be a mix of small scale farmers that actually they like to do their farming, and then we have these huge large scale farms, and we have a lot of urban farmers that do their own little farming activities there, and that's going to become a much more important role in the future. I think there's some important developments to be seen in the near future.
Yes, I see also business opportunity. You just introduced this pollination technology. Maybe like the urban farmers, they can also buy this kind of machine to help. Their small agriculture. That's very interesting. In Germany there is new study. They show more biodiversity in the cities than in the pure farmland. Yeah. Okay, we have the fifth question. It's a little bit difficult. So the question is, what are the major difference when identical sustainable agri-tech, like what you showed, and the agri-tech is applied in different geographic and cultural different places with different geographical and cultural backgrounds? For example, what is going to look like? You have the same technology, and if it's used adopted in Africa, in Latin America, so what's the major difference? Could you foresee?
I think it will come back a little bit. It ties back a little bit to the first question. I think you will have the different resources to actually to implement different technologies. But maybe I can give an example for gene edited crops. So gene editing is a technology where you kind of modify the crops, right, that are previous. You take different plants, and instead of this traditional breeding where you kind of cross plants, you just produce a plant that is resistant to pests or climate, for example. So now in countries like Brazil, where you have different soy varieties, this is just and large corporations to plant soy. This is just implemented in the field. But then, if you have the same technology that you would want to implement in smaller scale soy production that is not attached to huge corporations, that would not have the patent for these kind of varieties, we would have a whole different discussion about soy. Now, if we talk about rice, there are rice varieties that are resistant to saltwater stress, for example. So you can plant them extremely close to the coast. It's very popular in China. I think it actually comes. This variety was actually bred in China by Zhuan Longping, if I'm not mistaken. So if there's a patent on these kind of varieties, it's going to be not accessible to farmers in the same variety will not be accessible to farmers from different countries simply because of the lack of monetary resources. So I think we need to talk about accessibility of these kind of technologies, and how we can make food production a bit more fair in that sense, because it's not just large corporations that have the money to actually file patents and have patents. It's also about how can we in situations where people depend on the crops that they farm, how can we protect their livelihoods?
Yeah. I think the topic for now is quite big. The question is too big. So we can somehow, let's say, focus on the further development in China, and also at least should be more adapted, recognized by more Chinese politicians and maybe like big users of these coconut and rice and all these food products. So that's maybe, yeah, as the first, very urgent one to to focus on. So I think I take back my questions. These are not it's okay. Actually, you explained already in now. So I think in the chat room there is the last questions. Maybe we can use the last 2-3 minutes to because I think it's also important, so we are eating too much, let's say in China, eating too much rice. Whereas the intake of fruits and the vegetables are more. I would like to hear if Tom has considerations on that.
Yeah, so I think it's here. This question is about the mix of diets, right? So
yeah.
when you look at the World Health Organization's dietal recommendations, we get very specific recommendations. For example, you should reduce the amount of sugar to less than 5 grams a day. You should reduce the amount of salt consumed to less than 1 kind of small handful a day. You should eat more nuts and more vegetables. I didn't show that graph in this presentation, but there's like there's when you look at the UN report on nutrition security, there's actually a graph that shows basically all the food items, and then in red dots basically where we currently are in high, middle, and low income countries. And for all the food items that are good for us, we're actually at the very low end. And for all the things that are bad for us, like too much meat, too much ultra-processed foods, sweet beverages, things like that, we're pretty much all on the too much side. So I think a good guideline is to to kind of balance it out. Don't eat red meat pretty much every day, but be kind of a flexitarian, I would say, and eat some, push some vegetables in the diet, put some nuts in the diet, put some good protein sources, and reduce the meat consumption, the sugar, and the high salt intake.
Yeah.
I think that's what I can say on that.
Yeah, maybe the question came from like because you introduced and how to increase the productivity of the corns and cocoa nuts and the chocolates. It could be like you increase the productivity and then there will be more rice and more coffees on the market, because all the business people want to sell more and the people will be manipulated. Now the rice is getting cheaper and people is going to eat more rice. That's one of maybe the reason why the concern is there. But I'm not sure, but it's not your field actually. It's not. This is a very different topic.
I think there's maybe I can just pick up on this for 1 second. I think when we talk about diversification of cocoa, chocolate, cocoa, coffee, rubber, and rice, and we're not actually talking about increasing the yields necessarily. We're just talking about maintaining at least the yields, because what we're seeing is climate change is affecting the yields. Agriculture is affecting climate change, but climate change is affecting the yields. So actually the yields will go down in the future if we don't handle this. So diversification is supposed to handle this and maintain our supply. Then the distribution of what we are farming, that is also my field, but it's that's an entirely different discussion. So if we talk about diets, then this is I think this is a very wide discussion.
Yeah, in the book of Yuval Harari about the sapiens, like in the ancient time, we human eat everything, just much more diversity than now. And now it's like people, especially living in the cities, they tend to buy what's in the supermarket. right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's it's another very sophisticated topic, how to control our consuming habits. It has nothing to do with this with your research to increase the biodiversity, I think. Okay, are you interested to answer the last question, or it's
if agricultural planting becomes more diversified, will it increase the difficulty of harvesting crops and will it be more difficult to carry out mechanisms? It's talking about this question and they're curious about it. That's a very interesting question, and a lot of people are discussing about this. And in short, my answer is no, because you can. Let's just think for 1 second again about rice. So you can have a rice field, and you can have a rice field where you just have the sides where you can just walk around, right? Or you can have a rice field where you can have flower strips on the side. You just simply plant like plants that have flowers that attract bees, and that also attract natural biocontrol agents. There are studies that show quite dramatic effects of just having these flower strips. So you have basically higher yields. You need to use less pesticides, and you have more biodiversity in general in these farms. So that's diversification. That's one option of diversification I talked about. That doesn't affect at all if we use kind of a drone to apply fertilizers, which would be technology, or it doesn't apply if we use like a mechanical harvester going through the rice field. So I think, it depends on the diversification strategy that you're choosing. You can plant different genetic rice varieties, which would diversify your system, which is also shown to be beneficial for various outcome parameters. Also doesn't affect the harvesting of rice, for example. So I think it's a very important, very good question that is discussed at various levels. But I really don't think there's necessarily a trade-off.
Any contradiction. I think technology can be step by step developed. This is maybe people, everyone who is interested should go to the field, to your sites and look at it, then get more, more direct impression how it works. So otherwise we are only talking, here, it's not so practical. So Tom, I'm very interested to visit you in June, just let you know, but we can have a small talk later. Okay.
That sounds very good.
So, yes. Thank you very much again for this very fantastic presentation. I learned a lot. I hope the other also learned a lot. So let's close our learning session now, okay?
Thanks, Haixiang. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the opportunity to talk here.
Thank you, Haixiang.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night. Haixiang, good afternoon.